The emergency klaxons of Nexus Prime had been wailing for exactly 18 minutes and 32 seconds when Ambassador Kethmon decided that perhaps, just perhaps, calling an intergalactic crisis meeting over human children might have been a tiny bit of an overreaction. Might have been. The orbital station's council chamber buzzed with the kind of frantic energy typically reserved for imminent planetary extinctions or trade route collapses. Not, discussions about 10-year-olds attending summer camp. But here they were, representatives from 43 different species, all gathered in their finest panic-inducing formations, debating whether humanity's offspring posed an existential threat to galactic peace. "Order! Order!" Kethmon's voice cracked as he rapped his ceremonial gavel against the crystalline podium. His feathers, usually a magnificent azure blue, had shifted to an alarming shade of nervous yellow-green. The aviarch species weren't exactly known for their subtlety when it came to emotional displays. "The emergency session will come to—" "Emergency session, my scaled posterior!" Counselor Dracneth slammed her clawed hand onto her desk, causing 3 junior assistants to scatter like startled mice. The Saurian's reptilian features were twisted into an expression that could charitably be called barely contained horror. "We're talking about apex cubs, Kethmon. Miniature versions of the most dangerous predators in known space." A ripple of agreement, or possibly terror-induced muscle spasms, ran through the assembly. Security Chief Glixandra, whose crystalline form usually sparkled with calm blues and greens, was currently pulsing an ominous red that made the chamber's lighting flicker like a disco having a seizure. "If I may," they intoned in their harmonic crystal voice, "the statistical probability of successful, peaceful coexistence drops to approximately 0.00. "We get it, Glix!" Kethmon's feathers were now approaching emergency orange territory. "The numbers are bad, very bad, catastrophically bad." In the third tier of seating, Ambassador Yelnara's aquatic suit bubbled with what could only be described as aquatic anxiety. Her cetacean features were pressed against the transparent aluminum of her environmental chamber, creating rather unflattering nose prints. "But surely," she gurgled through her translator, "surely the humans wouldn't intentionally send their most dangerous offspring to interact with our young ones?" The chamber fell silent, dead silent. The kind of silent that makes you wonder if everyone's suddenly developed selective hearing loss. Counselor Brixtal, representing the Hive Mind Collective, began that unsettling clicking noise his species made when processing uncomfortable thoughts. "According to our intelligence reports," he buzzed, "human children are trained from birth in competitive scenarios. They engage in sports, ritualized combat designed to establish dominance hierarchies. And they consume vast quantities of sugar," added Security Chief Mordoon, his ursine features scrunched in disgust. "A stimulant that increases their already elevated energy levels." Dracneth nodded gravely. "Our xenobiologists reviewed their entertainment media. Human children regularly engage in activities called tag, clearly a hunting exercise, and hide and seek, obviously stealth training." The murmurs of agreement grew louder. Someone in the back rows shouted something about human children having playground politics, which sent another wave of horrified whispers through the assembly. "Furthermore," Kethmon continued, consulting his datapad with trembling talons, "human children are known to form gangs, pack structures for coordinated attacks. They establish territories called tree houses and engage in tribal warfare using projectile weapons called water balloons." Glixandra's crystalline form pulsed from red to deep purple. a color that roughly translated to, "We're all going to die horribly." The humans call their juvenile containment facilities schools. These institutions reportedly employ strict hierarchical systems, enforce rigid schedules, and subject the young ones to constant evaluation and competition. It's a military academy system. Yelnara's voice rose to a pitch that made several smaller species cover their auditory receptors. They're systematically conditioning their offspring for conquest. The chamber erupted into chaos. 43 different species, all trying to outpanic each other, created a symphony of terror that would have impressed composers of horror soundtracks across the galaxy. Delegates waved appendages, tentacles flailed, and at least 2 representatives appeared to have fainted. Though with the gaseous form delegates, it was always hard to tell. "Silence!" Kethmon's voice cracked like a whip, enhanced by the chamber's acoustics. "We must consider our options rationally." Rationally? Dracnith stood, her full 2.5-meter height, casting an imposing shadow. The humans want to send their predator cubs to the inaugural intergalactic youth exchange program. Our children, our innocent, peaceful young ones, would be exposed to creatures bred for dominance and aggression. Brixtal's clicking intensified. The hive mind has analyzed human historical data. Their species conquered their entire homeworld within mere millennia. They eliminated competing apex predators, subjugated other species, and reshaped entire ecosystems to suit their needs. And now, Mordun growled, they want to export that behavior to the rest of the galaxy, starting with our children. The horror of it all was almost too much to process. Here was humanity, a species that had gone from throwing rocks at mammoths to building interstellar civilizations in what amounted to a cosmic eye blink, asking to introduce their offspring to the galaxy's youth. Their offspring. The same species that had looked at the vast, hostile emptiness of space and decided it needed more humans in it. The same species that had encountered faster-than-light travel and immediately started asking, "But can we make it faster?" The same species that had responded to discovering they weren't alone in the universe with great new friends, a reaction that had terrified every other civilization for entirely different reasons than they'd expected. "We need expert consultation," Kethmon declared, his feathers finally settling into a more stable shade of worried teal. "We need to hear from someone who understands the human mindset." "You mean," Glixandra's form flickered nervously, "we need to speak with a human?" The chamber's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. "Specifically," Kethmon continued, swallowing hard, "we need to speak with their ambassador, the one they sent to negotiate the youth exchange program." Dracnith's scales rattled, a saurian expression of barely controlled panic. "You want to bring a human here? To Nexus Prime? While we're discussing the dangers of human children?" "It's the only way to properly assess the threat level," Kethmon replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "We need to understand their intentions, their methods, their parenting strategies." The phrase parenting strategies hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several delegates actually shuddered. "Fine," Dracnith hissed, "but I want full security protocols in place. Energy shields, containment fields, and emergency evacuation procedures." "Agreed," Kethmon nodded. "All those in favor of bringing the human ambassador to testify before this emergency council?" Tentacles, claws, pseudopods, and various other appendages rose throughout the chamber. Not enthusiastically, more like the way one might raise a hand to volunteer for a suicide mission, but raised nonetheless. Motion carried. Kethmon's voice cracked again. "Security Chief Glixandra, please escort the human ambassador to the chamber. And And may whatever deities we collectively believe in have mercy on our souls. As Glixandra's crystalline form shifted toward the chamber's exit, their harmonic voice carried a note of resignation that seemed to echo through every corner of the vast space. The human ambassador is already en route. She should arrive within 5 minutes. She? Yelnara's aquatic features pressed even closer to her chamber walls. They sent a female? The implications hit the assembly like a cosmic freight train. Female humans were the ones who carried and raised the apex cubs. Female humans were the ones with the strongest protective instincts. Female humans were the ones who, according to human entertainment media, became exponentially more dangerous when their offspring were threatened. "Oh, sweet stellar formations," Mordun whispered, "we're about to face a human mother." The chamber fell silent once more, but this time it was the silence of beings, contemplating their own mortality. In the distance, the soft hum of Nexus Prime's engines seemed to take on an ominous quality, like the purring of some massive predator. And then, just as the collective anxiety reached its peak, the chamber's main doors chimed with the gentle, cheerful sound that typically announced visiting dignitaries. 43 different species held their collective breath as the doors slid open with mechanical precision. In walked the human ambassador, carrying what appeared to be a bag. A simple, unremarkable bag. But in that moment, to the assembled delegates of the Galactic Council, it might as well have been a weapon of mass destruction. Ambassador Jasmine stepped into the council chamber with the kind of easy confidence that comes from having spent the last 15 years explaining to various alien species why humans don't actually eat their young, contrary to popular galactic misconceptions. She was a woman in her mid-40s, with laugh lines that suggested she'd heard every ridiculous theory about human behavior at least twice, and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that somehow managed to look both professional and maternal. The bag she carried, that simple, terrifying bag, was actually a standard diplomatic courier case, the kind used for carrying official documents and, occasionally, family photos. But the assembled delegates didn't know that. To them, it could have contained anything from military intelligence to, heaven forbid, actual human children ready to spring out and establish dominance hierarchies. "Good morning, esteemed delegates," Jazz said, her voice carrying that particular brand of patient amusement reserved for dealing with bureaucratic panic attacks. "I understand you have some concerns about our youth exchange proposal?" The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the vacuum of space. If pins could drop in vacuums, which they couldn't. But the point stood. Kethmon's feathers had gone from nervous teal to full-blown rainbow panic, cycling through colors that probably didn't have names in most languages. "Ambassador Jasmine," he managed, his voice climbing toward frequencies that hurt to hear. That is to say, the Council has expressed certain reservations." "Reservations," Drakneth interrupted, her reptilian form rising to full intimidating height, "about unleashing apex predator cubs upon the innocent youth of 43 peaceful civilizations." Jazz blinked once, twice, and then, to the horror of everyone present, she smiled. Not a polite diplomatic smile. Not a reassuring we-can-work-this-out smile. A smile that suggested she was trying very, very hard not to laugh. "I'm sorry," she said, setting her bag down with deliberate care. "Did you just call human children apex predator cubs?" The chamber erupted in a cacophony of overlapping explanations, accusations, and what could generously be called supporting evidence. Councillor Brixital's clicking reached machine gun intensity as he rattled off statistics about human territorial expansion. Yelnara's aquatic chamber bubbled like a boiling pot as she gestured frantically with her flippers. Security Chief Mordun began pacing in tight circles, his ursine form radiating the kind of nervous energy typically associated with caged animals. But it was Glixandra who took the lead, their crystalline form pulsing with authoritative purple light. Ambassador, we have conducted extensive research into human child rearing practices. The evidence is, disturbing. Jazz folded her hands and settled into the witness chair with the patience of someone who had clearly been through this exact conversation before, in multiple languages, possibly with interpretive dance involved. I'm listening. Human children, Glixandra began, consulting a data crystal that flickered ominously, are subjected to what your species calls competitive sports from an early age. These activities involve territorial disputes, resource acquisition, and the establishment of pack hierarchies through physical dominance. You mean soccer? Jazz asked. The crystalline being's form flickered with confusion. We are unfamiliar with that particular combat designation. It's a game where children kick a ball around and try to score goals. The most violent thing that usually happens is someone gets grass stains on their knees. Drakneth leaned forward, her scales catching the chamber's light in distinctly threatening ways. Our intelligence suggests otherwise. We have documentation of human children engaging in activities called dodgeball, clearly a projectile warfare training exercise. Capture the flag, added Mordun, which is obviously territorial conquest simulation. And Brixtal's voice buzzed with the certainty of someone who had clearly never seen actual children. They participate in spelling bees, competitive intelligence assessment designed to identify the intellectually superior specimens for leadership roles. Jazz's smile was growing wider, which was somehow making everyone in the chamber more nervous rather than less. Let me get this straight. You think human children are dangerous because they play games, participate in spelling contests, and occasionally throw rubber balls at each other? The pattern is clear, Kethmon squawked, his feathers now cycling through colors that violated several laws of physics. Human children are systematically trained for conquest from birth. They form social hierarchies called cliques, establish territorial boundaries called lunch tables, and engage in psychological warfare through activities called popularity contests. And they consume massive quantities of refined sugar, Yelnara added, her aquatic features pressed against her chamber wall in apparent horror. A known stimulant that enhances aggressive tendencies. Jazz looked around the chamber, taking in the faces and face equivalents of 43 different species, all staring at her with expressions ranging from terror to morbid fascination. It was, she reflected, like being asked to explain why water was wet to a room full of beings who had never encountered the concept of moisture. "Delegates," she said finally, her voice carrying the kind of gentle authority that came from years of explaining obvious things to panicked politicians. "I think there might be a small misunderstanding here." Misunderstanding? Drakneth's voice rose to a pitch that made several smaller delegates cover their auditory organs. "We have documented evidence of human children engaging in organized violence. Your entertainment media clearly shows young humans participating in activities called wrestling matches and boxing competitions." "Those are sports," Jazz replied patiently, "with rules, referees, and safety equipment. No one's actually trying to hurt anyone." Glixandra's crystalline form pulsed with skeptical orange light. "Our analysis indicates that human children regularly engage in pack behavior designed to exclude and intimidate rivals. They form exclusive social groups and use coordinated psychological tactics to maintain dominance. You mean friendships, Jazz said. Children having best friends and sometimes not getting along with everyone isn't exactly unusual behavior. But the competition, Kathman practically shrieked. The constant evaluation. Human children are graded, ranked, and sorted according to performance metrics from an early age. Jazz rubbed her temples, feeling the beginnings of what was going to be a spectacular headache. That's called education. We teach them things like reading, writing, and arithmetic. Basic life skills. Life skills, Mordoon repeated ominously. Or survival skills. Reading is a survival skill. Information acquisition and processing. Brixtal buzzed with the satisfaction of someone who had just solved a complex puzzle, designed to give human offspring advantages over competing species. Jazz stared at the assembled delegates for a long moment, watching as they nodded and murmured agreement with each other's increasingly absurd theories. It was like watching a group of marine biologists trying to explain why fish were clearly planning a coordinated assault on dry land. "Delegates," she said finally, "I have a question for you." The chamber fell silent again, though this time with the expectant quiet of beings waiting for crucial intelligence, rather than the terrified silence of those contemplating their doom. "How many of you," Jazz continued, "have actually observed human children interacting with other species?" More silence, this time with a distinctly uncomfortable edge. "How many of you have children of your own?" The uncomfortable silence deepened, taking on the quality of beings who had just realized they might have overlooked something important. "I see." Jazz's smile had evolved into something that was simultaneously amused and sympathetic. "And how many of you based your analysis of human child behavior on, what did you call it, entertainment media?" Kathman's feathers had settled into a shade that could best be described as a sheepish rainbow. "Well, that is to say, our xenobiologists conducted extensive research using available cultural documentation. You watched our movies and TV shows," Jazz translated, "and historical records. News reports about playground accidents and school competitions. The silence that followed was so profound it could have been bottled and sold as a meditation aid." Jazz reached for her bag, causing 43 different species to collectively hold their breath. "Delegates, I think it's time you met some real human children." The tension in the chamber ramped up to levels typically reserved for diplomatic crises involving planet-killing weapons. Security Chief Glixandra's form blazed with emergency red light, and at least 3 delegates appeared to have activated personal defense shields. Jazz opened her bag and pulled out a tablet. "I'd like you to meet my children," she said, her voice carrying a note of pride that was unmistakably maternal. "Emma, Danny, and Lily." The collective sigh of relief was audible, though it was quickly replaced by renewed nervousness as the implications hit home. Your children?" Drakneth's voice was barely above a whisper. "3 of them," Jazz confirmed cheerfully. "Ages 6, 8, and 10. Would you like to see some pictures?" The chamber erupted in panicked whispers. Here was a human female, a human mother, who had personally raised not 1, not 2, but 3 apex predator cubs. She was sitting calmly in their council chamber, surrounded by 43 different species, offering to show them photographic evidence of her offspring. Either she was the most confident predator in galactic history, or maybe, just maybe, they had gotten something fundamentally wrong about human children. Jazz activated her tablet, and the first image appeared on the chamber's main display screen. The assembled delegates leaned forward, prepared to witness documented evidence of humanity's most dangerous creations. What they saw was a little girl with pigtails feeding ducks by a pond. The image on the main display screen showed 8-year-old Emma in a yellow sundress, crouched by the edge of a small pond with a bag of breadcrumbs in her hands. A dozen ducks had gathered around her, some actually climbing onto her lap while she giggled and gently stroked their feathers. Her face was lit up with pure joy, the kind of unguarded happiness that exists only in childhood and Disney movies. The silence in the council chamber was deafening and confusing, and somehow more terrifying than all the panic that had come before it. This... dot, dot. Kethmon's voice cracked like an adolescent aviarch going through molt. This is your apex predator cub? This is Emma, Jazz said, her voice warm with maternal pride. She's 8. She loves animals, especially birds. Kethmon made a strangled noise. And she volunteers at the local animal shelter every weekend. Councillor Brixtal's clicking had slowed to a confused stutter. But where are the dominance displays? The territorial markings? The aggressive posturing toward competing species? Jazz tilted her head, studying the image with the kind of fond exasperation that suggested she'd answered this question before. She's feeding ducks, Counselor. The most aggressive thing she's done recently was argue with her brother about whose turn it was to pick the movie for family night. Argued? Dracnith leaned forward, her reptilian features sharp with interest. Verbal combat to establish hierarchical superiority? She wanted to watch a cartoon about talking horses. Danny wanted to watch something with robots. I suggested we watch both and have a double feature. Jazz's smile grew wider. Revolutionary conflict resolution. I know. Glixandra's crystalline form flickered between colors like a confused disco ball. This does not align with our behavioral projections. Let me show you another one. Jazz swiped to the next photo. The display screen now showed 6-year-old Danny, fast asleep in his bed, arms wrapped around a large orange tabby cat that was purring so loudly it seemed to vibrate the entire image. The boy's face was peaceful, relaxed, completely vulnerable. The cat, clearly a predator in its own right, was using Danny's chest as a personal heating pad, looking utterly content. The assembled delegates stared at the image with the kind of bewildered fascination typically reserved for optical illusions or impossible mathematical proofs. Your youngest apex cub, Yelnara's voice bubbled with confusion, is sleeping with a smaller predator? Mr. Whiskers adopted us about 3 months ago, Jazz explained. Danny was the first one he bonded with. They're inseparable now. Danny shares his lunch with him, reads him stories, and insists on tucking him in every night. Ambassador Mordun's ursine features scrunched in concentration. But surely this is a dominance display. The human cub is asserting control over a lesser predator species. Jazz looked at the image, then back at Mordun. He's cuddling with his cat. Cuddling? Brixtal repeated the word like he was trying to parse an alien language. This term is unfamiliar. Physical affection, comfort bonding, showing love through gentle contact. The explanation seemed to break something in several delegates' brains. Glixandra's form went through a color spectrum that probably didn't exist in nature, while Kethmon's feathers began cycling through what appeared to be a complete rainbow malfunction. Love? Dracnith's voice was barely above a whisper. Yes. Love. Jazz's expression softened. Danny loves that cat more than anything in the world. When Mr. Whiskers was sick last month, Danny spent 3 days sleeping on the floor next to his carrier, making sure he wasn't alone. This, this is not conquest behavior. Yelnara's aquatic features were pressed so close to her chamber wall that her nose was completely flattened. This is protective instinct, suggested Moradun. Nurturing behavior, Jazz confirmed. Which brings me to Lily. She swiped to the third photo, and the delegates collectively held their breath. 10-year-old Lily appeared on screen, but she wasn't alone. She was surrounded by what appeared to be a small army of elderly humans, all of them carrying grocery bags. Lily herself was hauling 2 bags that looked almost as big as she was, her face red with effort but beaming with pride. An elderly woman in the background was patting her head affectionately. "Your oldest cub." Glixandra's voice had taken on the harmonic quality of someone trying very hard to process contradictory information. "Appears to be assisting elderly members of your species." Lily organized a neighborhood helper program, Jazz said, practically glowing with parental pride. "Every Saturday, she goes door to door asking if any of our elderly neighbors need help with groceries, yard work, or just someone to talk to. She's got 15 regular clients now." The delegates exchanged glances, or the equivalent, depending on their optical configurations. "But why?" Kethmon's voice was plaintive. "What does she gain from this behavior? What resources is she acquiring? What territorial advantage?" Jazz was quiet for a moment, studying their faces with the kind of patience that suggested she was choosing her words very carefully. "She does it because it makes them happy, and making them happy makes her happy." That's not how apex predators function," Drakneth protested, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "No," Jazz agreed. "It's how children function." She swiped through several more photos in rapid succession. Emma teaching a younger child how to tie their shoes, Danny sharing his ice cream with a crying toddler at the park, Lily reading to a group of preschoolers at the local library. Each image showed human children engaged in acts of kindness, cooperation, and care that directly contradicted every assumption the council had made. "I don't understand." Yelnara's voice was small, confused. "Our projections indicated that human offspring would be aggressive, territorial, competitive." "Oh, they can be," Jazz said with a laugh. "Emma once had a meltdown because Danny got the last piece of cake." Danny went through a phase where he tried to claim the entire living room as his personal territory. And Lily, well, Lily can argue about homework with the intensity of a professional negotiator. Several delegates perked up at this, as if finally hearing something that made sense. "But," Jazz continued, "they also comfort each other when they're scared, share their toys with friends, and cry when they see other people get hurt. They're not miniature adults, and they're certainly not weapons. They're children." Kethamon's feathers had settled into a confused, but no longer panicked shade of blue-gray. "But the competition, the sports, the hierarchical structures are ways for them to learn cooperation, fair play, and how to handle both winning and losing gracefully," Jazz explained. "When Emma's soccer team loses a game, do you know what she does?" The delegates waited with bated breath. "She congratulates the other team and asks if they want to play again next week." The silence that followed this revelation was different from the previous ones. Less terrified, more contemplative. Councillor Brixtel's clicking had slowed to an almost meditative rhythm. "This behavioral pattern does not match our models." "Your models," Jazz said gently, "were based on the assumption that human children are tiny adults with fully developed predatory instincts. But that's not what childhood is for." Glixandra's crystalline form had settled into a soft, curious green. "Then what is childhood for?" Jazz smiled, and for the first time since entering the chamber, it was a smile without any trace of amusement at their expense. It was warm, understanding, and perhaps a little sad. Learning how to be human. The words hung in the air like a revelation that nobody had been expecting. For a moment, the entire council chamber seemed to hold its breath, all 43 species processing this concept that was somehow both simple and impossibly complex. Learning, Drakneth repeated slowly, as if testing the word. Not training, not conditioning, learning. Exactly. Jazz leaned forward in her chair, her diplomatic training kicking in as she recognized the shift in the room's atmosphere. These weren't panicked politicians anymore. They were beings genuinely trying to understand something fundamentally alien to their experience. Human children aren't born knowing how to cooperate, how to share, how to empathize. They have to learn it. Councillor Brixtal's clicking had taken on an almost musical quality. But your species' rapid expansion, your territorial dominance patterns, come from adults, Jazz finished. Adults who learned, hopefully, how to channel their protective instincts constructively. The same instincts that make a parent fight to protect their child also make them fight to build a better world for that child. She swiped back to the photo of Emma feeding the ducks. When Emma was 5, she found a bird with a broken wing in our backyard. Do you know what she did? The delegates waited with the rapt attention of students in a master class they hadn't known they needed. She brought it inside, made it a nest out of her favorite blanket, and tried to feed it cookie crumbs. She was so gentle, so careful, but she had no idea how to actually help an injured bird. Jazz's voice carried the warmth of a cherished memory. So, we took it to a wildlife rehabilitation center together. She insisted on visiting every day until it was ready to be released. And the significance of this behavior pattern? Glixandra's crystalline form pulsed with interested blue light. She learned compassion before she learned efficiency. She learned caring before she learned capability. By the time she's an adult, helping others won't be something she has to think about. It'll be who she is. Yelnara's aquatic features had shifted to an expression that might have been wonder. This is how you produce cooperative adults? Through childhood experiences that reinforce altruistic behavior? Among other things, yes. Jazz pulled up another photo, this one showing all 3 children working together to build an elaborate blanket fort. They also learn how to collaborate, how to compromise, how to solve problems together instead of competing for resources. But surely, Mordun interjected, his ursine features still skeptical, there must be some competitive element, some mechanism for identifying and developing superior specimens. Jazz's laugh was gentle, not mocking. Chief Mordun, every child is a superior specimen at something. Emma has an incredible memory for faces. She never forgets anyone she's met. Danny can spot patterns that adults miss entirely. Lily has a gift for making people feel heard and understood. She swiped to a video clip that began playing on the main screen. It showed the 3 children in what appeared to be their living room, engaged in what looked like a heated debate over a board game. But as the delegates watched, they could see the children negotiating, explaining their positions, and ultimately reaching a solution that satisfied everyone. This is conflict resolution, Jazz explained as the video played. They're not competing to dominate each other. They're learning how to disagree respectfully and find solutions that work for everyone. Kethmon's feathers had settled into a contemplative teal. This is completely contrary to our projections. Your projections were based on adult human behavior extrapolated backward, Jazz pointed out. But children aren't miniature adults any more than eggs or tiny chickens. They're something entirely different, with their own developmental needs and behaviors. But the sugar consumption, Yelnara protested weakly. The hyperactivity, the chaos. Jazz grinned. Have you ever watched children play after eating birthday cake? It's not aggression. It's pure joy expressed through movement. They run and laugh and dance because they're happy, not because they're hunting prey. She pulled up another video, this one showing Danny and Emma racing around their backyard, giggling hysterically, while their parents watched from lawn chairs. Look at their faces. That's not predatory behavior. That's play. The word play seemed to strike the delegates like a thunderbolt. Play, Brixtal repeated, his clicking taking on an almost reverent tone. Non-productive activity engaged in for pleasure rather than survival advantage. Exactly. Human children play because it's fun, because it helps them learn about the world, because it's how they process emotions and build relationships. Jazz's voice grew warmer. When Danny pretends to be a dragon, and Lily pretends to be a knight, they're not establishing dominance hierarchies. They're exploring concepts of good and evil, bravery and friendship. And they switch roles, she continued, pulling up a photo of Danny in a makeshift knight costume, while Lily wore construction paper dragon wings. Today's dragon becomes tomorrow's hero. It's about imagination, not conquest. The chamber had grown remarkably quiet, but it was the thoughtful quiet of minds being changed rather than the terrified silence of impending doom. Glixandra's crystalline form had shifted to a warm, curious yellow. Ambassador Jazz, may I ask, how do human adults maintain these cooperative behaviors? What prevents them from reverting to competitive territorial patterns? Some do revert, Jazz admitted honestly, but most don't, because they remember what it felt like to be cared for as children. They want to create that same feeling of safety and belonging for others, their own children, their communities, sometimes even complete strangers. She pulled up one final photo. All three children asleep in a pile on the living room couch, arms draped over each other, faces peaceful and content. This, she said softly, is what human children really are. Not apex predators or territorial competitors, just small beings learning how to love and be loved, how to build rather than destroy, how to include rather than exclude. The silence that followed was profound, contemplative, and entirely free of panic. Ambassador Kethmon was the first to break the contemplative silence, his voice soft and tinged with something that might have been shame. Ambassador Jazz, I must ask you something, and I hope you will not take offense. Jazz nodded encouragingly, her tablet still displaying the image of her three children peacefully asleep together. In all our research, Kethmon continued, his feathers now a muted gray that seemed to reflect deep thought, we never found examples of what you've shown us. We saw competition, hierarchy, territorial disputes, but not this, not care, not cooperation. He paused, swallowing hard. Why did we miss this? Jazz was quiet for a moment, studying the faces around her with the expression of someone choosing her words very carefully. Can I ask you something in return? How many of you have ever observed children, any species children, being nurtured by their parents? The silence that followed was telling. Aviarch young, Kethmon said slowly, are expected to achieve flight within their first season or face abandonment. It ensures only the strongest survive to adulthood. Saurian hatchlings, Drakneth added, her voice barely above a whisper, are raised in isolation to prevent resource competition. Sibling interaction is discouraged. Glixandra's crystalline form flickered with what might have been embarrassment. Quartz-born reproduction occurs through crystal division. There is no childhood phase, no development period, no learning. Jazz felt something twist in her chest as the pieces fell into place. None of you were raised with siblings. None of you experienced parental protection. None of you learned cooperation through play. The Hive Mind Collective, Brixtal buzzed quietly, produces workers with predetermined functions. Individual development is considered inefficient. Our cetacean pods, Yelnara's voice was smaller than before, require young ones to prove their hunting capabilities before full acceptance. Failure results in exile. Ursine cubs, Mordoon rumbled, compete directly with their birthmates for parental resources. The stronger survive, the weaker. He trailed off. Jazz looked around the chamber, seeing these beings, these powerful, intelligent, technologically advanced beings with completely different eyes. You've never seen children who were allowed to simply be children. What we interpreted as humanity's aggressive expansion, Glixandra said, their harmonic voice carrying a note of dawning realization, your territorial conquest, your competitive nature. Was adults trying to create a safer world for their children? Jazz finished. We don't expand because we're aggressive. We expand because we want our children to have more opportunities, more resources, more chances to grow and learn and become who they're meant to be. The revelation hit the chamber like a shock wave. 43 different species, all looking at humanity's rapid galactic expansion through an entirely new lens. The Youth Exchange Program, Kethmon said slowly, isn't about training your apex cubs to interact with other species. It's about teaching all our children that differences don't have to mean conflict, Jazz confirmed. That cooperation creates better outcomes than competition. That the galaxy is big enough for everyone to thrive. Counselor Brixtal's clicking had taken on an almost musical quality. You want our young ones to learn what human children already know. How to play together. How to share. How to care for one another. I want all children to have what my children have, Jazz said, her voice thick with emotion. The chance to be innocent, to be protected, to learn kindness, before they learn fear. Dracnith stood slowly, her massive form no longer intimidating but somehow vulnerable. Ambassador Jazz, I have a confession. I have offspring. 3 hatchlings, currently in their 3rd molting cycle. I have seen them exactly twice since their hatching. Why? Jazz asked gently. Because that is our way. Because proximity breeds competition. Because ... Dracnith's voice cracked. Because I was terrified I would make them weak. Jazz's eyes filled with tears. Counselor, the strongest people I know are the ones who learned how to love and be loved as children. Strength isn't about surviving alone. It's about building something worth protecting together. Show us, Yelnara said suddenly, her aquatic features pressed against her chamber wall. Show us how the Youth Exchange Program would work. Show us what our children could become. Jazz smiled, wiping her eyes, and pulled up a presentation on her tablet. Here's what we're proposing. The next hour passed in a blur of questions, discussions, and planning sessions. Where Jazz had expected to spend the day defending human children against accusations of predatory behavior, she instead found herself designing cooperative learning programs, cross-species play activities, and cultural exchange initiatives that would benefit children from all participating worlds. 6 months later, Ambassador Jazz stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Youth Exchange Station, watching as children from 44 different species played together in the Central Garden Dome. Human children taught aviarch fledglings how to play tag, flight included. Saurian youngsters learned cooperative games from quartz-born crystal sprites. Cetacean calves splashed in the aquatic playgrounds, while ursine cubs learned the art of sharing snacks. And in the center of it all, her own children, Emma, Danny, and Lily, were leading a mixed group of young beings in what appeared to be an elaborate game involving building blocks, imagination, and lots of giggling. "Ambassador," a familiar harmonic voice said behind her. Jazz turned to find Glixandra, their crystalline form now permanently settled into warm, happy yellows and golds. "The preliminary reports are in," they continued. "Cooperation scores among all participating species youth have increased by 300%. Conflict resolution skills have improved dramatically. And most surprisingly, academic performance has risen across all metrics." "Not surprising at all," Jazz said with a smile. "Children learn better when they feel safe, supported, and connected to others." "There is one more thing," Glixandra added, their voice carrying a note of wonder. "Several adult delegates have requested permission to visit the station. They want to observe the children's activities." "Why?" "They want to learn how to play." Jazz's smile grew wider as she watched her daughter Emma teaching a young aviarch how to braid friendship bracelets, while Danny shared his juice box with a homesick saurian hatchling. In the distance, Lily was leading a group story time where children from 8 different species collaborated on an epic tale about brave space explorers who solved problems through teamwork rather than conquest. It turned out that the most dangerous thing about human children wasn't their potential for aggression. It was their unlimited capacity to teach an entire galaxy how to be better than it ever thought possible. And somewhere in the depths of space, Ambassador Kethmon was having his first real conversation with his own offspring, learning that being a father was infinitely more rewarding than being a survivor. "There's something else," Glixandra said, interrupting Jazz's thoughts. "Something we didn't expect." Jazz turned, curiosity piqued by the unusual note in their harmonic voice. "The adult delegates who have visited," they continued, "many of them have begun implementing changes on their home worlds. Drakneth has established the first Saurian family units in over 2,000 cycles. Mordune's people are experimenting with group child-rearing instead of individual survival training." Jazz felt her heart swell. "And Yelnara's cetacean pods have stopped exiling young ones who struggle with hunting. Instead, they're teaching them alternative skills: art, storytelling, caregiving." Glixandra's form pulsed with amazement. They're discovering that diversity of talents makes the entire pod stronger. Through the observation window, Jazz watched as Emma helped a young quartz-born entity understand the concept of pretend, something utterly foreign to a species that reproduced through crystal division but magical in its simplicity. "Even more remarkable," Glixandra continued, "several species are reporting that their adults who visit the station return home different, more cooperative, more innovative, more willing to try diplomatic solutions before aggressive ones. Because they're remembering what it feels like to wonder instead of worry," Jazz murmured, "what it feels like to create instead of compete." "The Hive Mind Collective has requested something unprecedented," Glixandra added quietly. "They want to establish individual identity protocols for their young. They want to see what happens when their offspring are allowed to develop unique personalities. Jazz had to wipe her eyes again. In trying to protect their children from human apex cubs, the galaxy had accidentally discovered something far more transformative than they'd ever imagined. The revolution had begun, not with weapons or territorial expansion or competitive dominance, but with children playing together and adults remembering what it felt like to hope.